How do you increase focus? You know, people are so familiar with sitting down, reading a couple pages of a book and realizing that none of it sunk in. Or talking to someone and seeing their mouth move, maybe even nodding your head subconsciously and go, and none of it sinks in. This can be very damaging for school, work performance, and relationships, as many of you know. Costello, incidentally, never seems to pay attention to anything I say while looking directly at me, which contradicts what I'm about to say, which is that the best way to get better at focusing is to use the mechanisms of focus that you were born with. And the key principle here is that mental focus follows visual focus. We are all familiar with the fact that our visual system can be unfocused, blurry, or jumping around, or we can be very laser focused on one location in space. What's interesting and vitally important to understanding how to access neuroplasticity is that you can use your visual focus and you can increase your visual focus as a way of increasing your mental focus abilities more broadly. So I'm going to explain how to do that. Plasticity starts with alertness. And as I mentioned before, that alertness can come from a sense of love, a sense of joy, a sense of fear, doesn't matter. There are pharmacologic ways to access alertness too. The most common one is, of course, caffeine, which, if you watch the sleep episodes, you know reduces this molecule that makes us sleepy called adenosine. I drink plenty of caffeine. I'm a heavy user of caffeine. I don't think abuser of caffeine. I think in reasonable amounts, provided we can still fall asleep at night. Caffeine can be a relatively safe way to increase epinephrine. Now, many people are now also using Adderall. So I don't want to tell people what to do or not to do, but think carefully about how often you're focusing on something and how good you are or poor you are at focusing on something that's challenging. So once you get this epinephrine, this alertness, you get the acetylcholine released and you can focus your attention, then the question is for how long? And in an earlier podcast, I talked about these ultradian cycles that last about 90 minutes. The typical learning bout should be about 90 minutes. I think that learning bout will no doubt include 5 to 10 minutes of warm-up period. I think everyone should give themselves permission to not be fully focused in the early part of that bout, but that in the middle of that bout, for the middle hour or so, you should be able to maintain focus for about an hour or so. So that, for me, means eliminating distractions. That means turning off the Wi-Fi. I put my phone in the other room. If I find myself reflexively getting up to get the phone, I will take the phone and lock it in the car outside. If I find myself going to get it anyway, I am guilty of giving away the phone for a period of time, or even things more dramatic. I've thrown it up on my roof before, so I can't get to it till the end of the day. That thing is pretty compelling, and we come up with all sorts of reasons why we need to be in contact with it. But I encourage you to try experiencing what it is to be completely immersed in an activity where you feel the agitation that your attention is drifting, but you continually bring it back. And that's an important point, which is that attention drifts, but we have to re-anchor it. We have to keep grabbing it back. And the way to do that, if you're sighted, is with your eyes. That as your attention drifts and you look away, you want to try and literally maintain visual focus on the thing that you're trying to learn. Feel free to blink, of course, but you can greatly increase your powers of focus and the rates of learning, which is anchored in all the work of Merzenic, Hubel-Wiesel, and others. Now, that's the trigger for plasticity. But the real secret is that neuroplasticity doesn't occur during wakefulness. It occurs during sleep. We now know that if you focus very hard on something for about 90 minutes or so, maybe you even do several bouts of that per day, if you can do that. Some people can only do one focus bout of learning. That night and the following nights while you sleep, the neural circuits that were highlighted, if you will, with acetylcholine transmission will strengthen and other ones will be lost, which is wonderful because that's the essence of plasticity. And what it means is that when you eventually wake up a couple days or a week later, you will have acquired the knowledge forever, unless you go through some process to actively unlearn it. And we will talk about unlearning in a later episode. So mastering sleep is key in order to reinforce the learning that occurs. But let's say you get a really poor night of sleep after a bout of learning. Chances are, if you sleep the next night or the following night, that learning will occur. There's a stamp in the brain where this acetylcholine was released. It actually marks those synapses neurochemically and metabolically so that those synapses are more biased to change. Now, if you don't ever get that deep sleep, then you probably won't get those changes. There's also a way in which you can bypass the need for deep sleep, at least partially, by engaging in what I call non-sleep deep rest, these NSDR protocols. But I just want to discuss the science of this. There was a paper that was published in Cell Reports last year that shows that if people did, it was a spatial memory task, actually a quite difficult one, where they had to remember the sequence of lights lighting up. And if there are just 2 or 3 lights in a particular sequence, it's easy. But as you get up to 15 or 16 lights and numbers in the sequence, it actually gets quite challenging. If immediately after, and it was immediately after the learning, the actual performance of this task, people took a 20-minute non-sleep deep rest protocol or took a shallow nap, so lying down, feet slightly elevated perhaps, just closing their eyes, no sensory input, the rates of learning were significantly higher for that information than were that to just had a good night's sleep the following night. So you can actually accelerate learning with these NSDR protocols or with brief naps, 90 minutes or less. So the key to plasticity in childhood is to be a child. The key to plasticity in adulthood is to engage alertness, engage focus, and then to engage non-sleep deep rest and deep sleep while you're in your typical bout of sleep.